Last time, we talked about how to use an array of points and linear interpolation to draw shapes on the screen that would otherwise be difficult to make using parametric equations. At the end, we took a look at one of its shortcomings, which was the fact that unless you're drawing something like a square, you'll need some programmatic way to determine the points, and a way to determine the order in which you connect them. Without that, it's quite difficult to do by hand, and if you wanted to animate it in some manner, you'd basically have to recalculate all the points by hand or program the exact animation you wanted into your program. Not fun. Thankfully, OsciStudio has solved many of these problems for us already. Extending this idea we introduced last time, which was a graphics first approach rather than sound first, let's take a look at how to use Blender and OsciStudio to create more dynamic and complex images on the scope. Before we get into the weeds of how to use OsciStudio and Blender, let's see how to set things up and how both pieces of software work together. You can find and download Blender here. Blender is a wonderful free and open source piece of software for 3D computer graphics. It's specifically designed for this, so if we ever want to draw complex models on our scope, we can create them here. Next, we'll need OsciStudio. This one is not free, but it's only 34 euros, which is a little less than 40 bucks, so it won't break the bank. To connect the two programs, we'll need to install a plugin for Blender that came with OsciStudio. Open the Blender Preferences menu, then go to Add-ons. In the top right, we'll click on Install. Now we need to locate the Python script. The script is actually located in the OsciStudio app. To get to it, we'll have to navigate through our directories. Make sure you know where you've got the OsciStudio app installed before continuing. I've got it in my Applications folder. Blender starts me in Users/Eric Leonardson, so I'll go up 2 levels, go into Applications, and we don't see the OsciStudio app. It's there, it's just not visible to us. If I type into the little bar up here and add OsciStudio.app to our current path, it'll put me inside. Then we go to Contents, Library, Blender. Inside, you'll find the Python script we're looking for. Select it and then click Install Add-on, and you'll be good to go. Now we'll open up OsciStudio so that Blender can start sending the mesh data to it. You'll start out with the settings window. The important thing to note here is the Blender network port, which is currently set to 11995. We can leave the rest of the settings as is and click Start. If we go into our render properties in Blender, we can scroll down and see something called OsciStudio Global Settings. If you haven't installed the add-on, we wouldn't be able to find it. This is where we'll be able to set up the connection between Blender and OsciStudio. Max vertices controls how many vertices can be in our meshes. The higher the number, the longer it takes for OsciStudio to process the mesh. If you ever don't see an image in OsciStudio, it may be because your mesh has more vertices than the max vertices set in the OsciStudio global settings. Either reduce the number of vertices in your mesh, or increase the size of max vertices. Generally speaking, a lower vertice count on your meshes is better than raising max vertices. Port number is how OsciStudio and Blender communicate. We need these numbers to match between the two, and by default, they do. This is another thing to check though if your connection between them is not working. Click Connect and you should see the cube appear in OsciStudio. You can click on this settings cog in the top right to open up this nice overlay while you work in OsciStudio to see what the image you're working on looks like without using the scope. Now, we're not seeing a cube, but that's because in OsciStudio, we're looking at the cube from the top. If I switch my view in Blender to be in line with the Z-axis, we'll be looking at the cube the way OsciStudio sees it. If I rotate the cube in Blender, Blender will send the updated mesh to OsciStudio, and we'll start to see the whole cube. Once we have the mesh exactly as we want it, we could close Blender if we wanted to, and OsciStudio will remember how to draw it. From here, we can work on the mesh however we see fit, and OsciStudio will automatically turn it into sound. If I add more meshes, we can see that it will draw all of them at the same time. You might have noticed that in this scene in Blender, in addition to the meshes, there's also a camera and a light, but we don't see them in OsciStudio. This is because OsciStudio only cares about meshes. It will ignore anything that isn't a mesh. For example, if I added a text to this scene, it won't display. It can also be useful to sometimes keep a mesh in Blender but not have it appear in OsciStudio. There's 2 ways to do this. We can either hide it in Blender by clicking on this little eye icon, or going to the slider over here in OsciStudio and bringing that down all the way to 0. If we want Blender to look more like how things will appear on the scope, we can change the viewport's shading method to wireframe. Go to the top right corner of the viewport and click on this little icon right here. Now Blender only shows us the mesh of each model we're working with rather than filling in the faces. Let's start looking at some of the effects we can apply to our meshes. I'll clear out all these other meshes and stick with the default cube. We've already seen rotate. We can turn it on and off by clicking on the little speaker icon over here, and it also has options for an LFO to slowly change these parameters over time. If we press N while hovering over any of these sliders, we can type in any number we want. We can even type in an expression and OsciStudio will calculate it for us. This is really useful, but be careful. OsciStudio doesn't stop you from typing in a number that could crash the program. Below this, we have trace. Length will control how much of the image we draw, and from controls where we start. These can also be controlled with an LFO. Ball is pretty cool. It will take any mesh and attempt to turn it into a sphere. 1 for maximum spherage and 0 for none. R controls the radius. If you ever want to change the order in which effects are applied, you can just click, hold, and drag them to where you'd like them to be. OsciStudio has a bunch more effects we can use, but rather than showing you how every single one works, I encourage y'all to have a look at them and see how they work on your own. It's a lot of fun to mess around with them and see what sorts of crazy combinations you can come up with. Some other things to note here, if we right-click, we can pull up a menu with all of OsciStudio's built-in effects. If we click on the live coding examples, we can look at some examples Hansi wrote showing how some of the techniques he created work, or we can add a built-in effect instead of live coding our own. In order to use the live coding part of OsciStudio, you'll need to know a bit about how to program in C++. I myself am not much of a C++ programmer, but since OsciStudio doesn't have access to C++'s STL, it ends up being more C-like anyways. Don't be afraid to jump in and try it out. There's no need to spend hundreds of hours learning how to code in C++ to get started experimenting. One thing we'd probably like to do is animate our images. There's a couple approaches for this. In Blender, we could create an animation like this. While the animation is running in Blender, OsciStudio won't update. But we can send the animation to Blender by clicking Send Animation. Once it's in OsciStudio, we'll need to use OsciStudio's timeline to get it to play. Press E while hovering over anything in OsciStudio, and it will be added to the timeline. If you don't see the timeline, you can either click on Clips or press Tab to make it appear. We want to animate this time parameter, so we'll add it to the timeline. We can then click in here to have the time ramp through all of the frames of our animation. If we wanted it to play slower, we could either make the ramp take longer or decrease the BPM. To see what a composition in OsciStudio might look like, we can actually look at some demo files and see how Jerobeam Fenderson actually constructed some of the bits for his tracks in his album Oscilloscope Music. To find these, all you have to do is look at the folder inside the OsciStudio app called Examples. Once you've created something you like, you can press the little red button in the top right here to record, and then let OsciStudio do its thing. If you had a loop going in your timeline and wanted it to record perfectly, you can press Command B on a Mac or Control B for Windows, and OsciStudio will go through the timeline once for you. There's a whole lot more we could talk about, but this covers the basics of what you might want to do with Blender and OsciStudio. Some things that would be worth checking out after you've gotten a handle on all this might be the following. Using Vamp or a grease pencil to remove back faces and portions of meshes behind other meshes. Using animation nodes in Blender. Using Blender to turn text into meshes for OsciStudio to write things on the screen. This is the end of the tutorial, but I wanted to mention at the end here the theory behind how OsciStudio is turning 3D models into sound for those who are curious about what is actually going on behind the scenes. To do so, it has to solve what is known as the traveling salesperson problem, which is a notoriously difficult problem in computer science. The more complex the mesh in Blender, the more difficult the problem will be to solve. In fact, any solution to this problem that can be computed in a reasonable amount of time won't be optimal. A common place where a solution is needed for this is in things like Google Maps when you ask for directions. When OsciStudio receives the mesh, it has a list of points and the connections between them. But since we're going to store the vertices in an array and connect them with linear interpolation, we need the vertices to be in a specific order so that all of the edges of the mesh show up in the right place. Additionally, in order to preserve the fidelity of the image as much as possible, We'd like it to take the shortest path. OsciStudio's solution to the TSP takes care of all this. Tackling this problem yourself and learning about how others have done it is a whole other rabbit hole you could go down. I've been very brief here and merely mentioned that solving this problem is how it's done, but if you'd like an in-depth explanation of how people have approached this problem in the past, I've provided some links in the description.